This podcast was sponsored by King James and the 12 Disciples. Just kidding. Welcome to this episode of Growing Up Fundy. I am your host, Sydney Davis, Jr. So this episode is going to be the second half of the Four Horsemen Roundtable between Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens. This is the second of a 2-hour roundtable that they held in 2007. The audio and video is available for free online. You can get it through richarddawkins.net, Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reasoning and Science, and you can also see it on YouTube. But I wanted to post it here too, just in case anybody like myself was not aware that this conversation even existed. Somehow, I don't know how this escaped me. This is wild. This is kind of like the time that I saw Britney Spears and Brandy on concert at the same time. It's just merging of power and voices and things that I love. So anyway, without further ado, enough of my voice. If you haven't heard episode 1 or the first half of this 2-hour discussion, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it just to kind of provide some context and to kind of a baby step into this context and information. But if you've already heard episode 1 or the first half of this roundtable, then here is the second half. And again, I would like to reiterate, like I did the first episode, this is not me trying to get you to agree with everything that's being said in this roundtable. This is not me trying to get you to think that everything they're saying is true or correct or infinite. This is simply a lot of valuable information and a lot of questions that I think are healthy to pose, and a lot of very interesting debate and discussion that goes on throughout both of these hours of discussion. And I think it's always really important to just see what opinions are out there, even if they're opinions that are the complete antithesis of what you believe. And even if you don't like what you hear or you don't agree with it, I think it's always wise to hear opposing viewpoints and to know exactly why we disagree with those viewpoints. So if this gets you to research more about your beliefs and find out more concrete reasoning as to why it is you feel the way that you do about certain things, then this will have had the exact same effect and a positive impact, I feel like, as if you just agreed with everything. So as long as it just makes you think, I feel like I've done my job. But again, enough of my voice. I can't wait for you to hear the second hour of this roundtable called The Four Horsemen. And with that, I bid thee adieu. Let's just jump right in.
There are two issues converge here. One is the question, what do we want to accomplish? What do we reasonably think we can accomplish? And then this article of faith that I think circulates, unfortunately, among people of our viewpoint, that you can't argue anyone out of their beliefs. I mean, well, is this a completely fatuous exercise, or can we actually win a war of ideas with people? And I think, certainly judging from my email, we can't. I mean, I'm constantly getting email from people who have lost their faith and, in effect, been argued out of it. And the straw that broke that camel's back was either one of our books or some other process of reasoning or incompatibility of what they knew to be true and what they were told by their faith, that I think we have to just highlight the fact that it's possible for people to be shown the contradictions and internal to their faith, or the contradiction between their faith and what we've come to know to be true about the universe, and they just, the process can take minutes or months or years, but they have to renounce their superstition in the face of what they now know to be true.
I was having an argument with a very sophisticated biologist who's a brilliant expositor of evolution, and he still believes in God. And I said, how can you, what's this all about? And he said, I accept all your rational arguments, however, it's faith. And then he said this very significant phrase to me, there's a reason that it's called faith. He said it very decisively, very almost aggressively. There's a reason that it's called faith. And that was to him the absolute knockdown clincher. Right. You can't argue with it because it's faith. And he said it proudly and defiantly, rather than in any sort of apologetic way.
And you get it all the time in North America from people who say you've got to read William James and have had to be able to judge other people's subjective experiences, which is something that's by definition impossible to do.
Right.
If it's real to them, why can't you respect it? I mean, this wouldn't be accepted in any other field of argument at all. The oppression people are under is the critical thing about them. I had a debate with a very senior Presbyterian in Orange County. I asked him, because we were talking about biblical literalism, of which he wasn't an exponent, but I said, well, what about the graves opening at the time of the crucifixion according to St. Matthew? Matthew, I'd rather say. And everyone getting out of their graves in Jerusalem, walking around greeting old friends in the city. I was going to ask him, doesn't that rather cheapen the idea of the resurrection of Jesus? But he mistook my purpose. He wanted to know if I believed that had happened. That was what he thought.
Right.
And he said that as a historian, which he also was, he was inclined to doubt it.
Right.
But that as a Presbyterian minister, he thought it was true. I thought, well, all right then.
How many personalities do we have?
I'm seriously, for me, it was enough that I got him to say that.
Right.
I said, in that case, I rest my case. In fact. I don't want to say any more to you now. You've said all I could say.
Yeah. Well, there's one other chip I'd like to put on the table here. There's this phenomenon of someone like Francis Collins, or the biologist you just mentioned, someone who obviously has enough of the facts on board, enough of a scientific education to know better, and still does not know better, or professes not to know better. And I think we have a cultural problem where, and this was actually brought home to me at one talk I gave. A physics professor came up to me at the end of the talk and told me that he had brought one of his graduate students who was a devout Christian and who was quite shaken by my talk, and all I got from of this report was that this was the first time his faith had ever really been explicitly challenged. And so there's something about that. It's true to say that you can go through the curriculum of becoming a scientist and never have your faith explicitly challenged because it's taboo to do so. And now we have engineers who can build nuclear bombs in the Muslim world who still think it's plausible metaphysics that you can get to paradise and get 72 virgins. And we have people like Francis Collins who think that on Sunday you can kneel down in the dewy grass and give yourself to Jesus because you're in the presence of a frozen waterfall. And on Monday you can be a physical geneticist.
Well, according to our friend, the great Pervez Hoodboy, the great Pakistani physicist, there are people who think you can use the jinns, the devils, and harness their power for the reactor.
It's almost tempting to fund such a project.
Yeah, and it seems, and I gather that, again, I can't get over him still, the respected Tariq Ramadan of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, says in his book, I'm told, that he believes in jinns too.
Right.
I hope I'm not doing him an injustice. I've been told that in his book, In the Steps of the Prophet, he says as much. So one is up against things that are flat out primitive and superstitious.
I think it may be easier than we're supposing to shake people's faith. There's been a moratorium on this for a long time. We're just the beginning of a new wave of explicit attempts to shake people's faith, and it's bearing fruit. And the obstacles, it seems to me, are not that we don't have the facts or the arguments. It's these strategic reasons for not professing it, not admitting it. Not admitting it to yourself, not admitting it in public, because your family is going to view it as a betrayal. You're just embarrassed to admit that you were taken in by this for so long. It takes, I think, tremendous courage to just declare that you've given that all up. And if we can find ways to help people find that courage and give them some examples of people who have done this, and they're doing just fine. They may have lost the affections of a parent or something like that. They may have hurt some family members, but still, I think it's a good thing to encourage. And I don't think we should assume that we can't do this. I think we can.
Yes, it's almost patronizing to suggest that we couldn't. I mean, to suggest that it shouldn't, that it's not. On the other hand, I think we all know people who seem to manage this kind of split brain feat of, as Sam said, believing one thing on a Sunday and then something totally contradictory or incompatible. in the rest of the week. And there's nothing, I suppose, neurologically wrong with that. I mean, there's no reason why one shouldn't have a brain that's split in that that kind of way.
But it is unstable in a certain way. But
yeah.
And I'm sure you're right that people do this, and they're very good at it, and they do it by deflecting attention from it.
Yeah.
And let's start.
But how you can live with it?
Let's start focusing attention.
How can you live with a contradiction in your?
By forgetting that you're doing this and by not attending to it. I think what I would love to do is to invent a memorable catchphrase or term that would rise unbidden in their minds when they caught themselves doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would think, oh, this is one of those cosmic shifts that
Right.
Dennett and Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens are talking about. Oh, right, and they think this is somehow illicit. Just to create a little more awareness in them of what a strange thing it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say that I think that cognitive dissonance is probably necessary for everyday survival. Everyone does it a bit.
You mean tolerating cognitive dissonance?
No, practicing.
Actually practicing it.
Practicing, because, I mean, I don't know, take the case of someone who's a member of MoveOn.org. They think the United States government is a brutal, militaristic, imperial regime that crushes the poor and invades other people's countries. But they pay their taxes. It's very, very rare that they don't. They send their children to school. They do their stuff. You know, they don't act all the time as if 10% of what they believe is true.
Right.
Yeah.
Partly because it would be impossible. Say with people in the 50s who, members of the John Birch Society, who thought President Eisenhower was a communist. Okay, you get up in the morning, you believe that. What White House is run by the Kremlin, but then you have to go and get the groceries.
Right. Right.
And do all that stuff.
Why aren't you
You still have to go and do it.
Too many commitments. Yeah.
But you absolutely wouldn't be challengeable in your belief. It would be very, very important to you, but there would be no way in your life, your real life, of vindicating or practicing the opinion that you have. And I'm sure that the same is true of people who say, well, I shouldn't really prefer one child to another or one parent to another, but I do. I'm just not going to act as if I do.
Right.
All kinds of things of this kind.
But what do you think as
Or
educators?
Senator Craig saying he's not gay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in his own mind, he's absolutely sure he's not.
Right. Yeah.
But he can't manage his life by saying he is, or he isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a question I wanted to ask was this. We should ask ourselves what our real objective is.
Yeah.
Do we in fact wish to see a world without faith? I think I would have to say that I don't. I don't either expect to or wish to see that.
What do you mean by faith?
I don't think it's possible because it replicates so fast, faith, as often as it's cut down or superseded or discredited. It replicates, it seems to me, extraordinarily fast, I think for Freudian reasons, principally to do with the fear of extinction.
So you mean faith in supernatural paradigms?
Wish.
But why would you not wish it?
Wish thinking. And then the other thing is, would I want this argument to come to an end? With all having
you wouldn't
conceded
like to retire and move on to
Hitchens
other
really won
questions?
that round. Now nobody in the world believes in God. Now, apart from being unable to picture this, I'm not completely certain that it's what I want. I think it is rather to be considered as sort of the foundation of all arguments about epistemology, philosophy, biology, and so on. That it's the thing you have to always to be arguing against. The other
It's an
explanation.
extraordinary thing. I don't understand what you're. I mean, I understand you're saying that it'll never work, but I don't understand why you wouldn't wish it.
Because I think, as a bit like the argument of the argument between, Huxley and Darwin. Huxley and Wilberforce, or Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. I want it to go on.
Because it's interesting. Because
I want our side to get more refined and theirs to be ever more exposed. But I can't see it with one hand clapping.
But you don't want it to go on with the jihadists. I mean, there's a certain face of this.
No, but I don't have a difference of opinion with the jihadists.
Well, you do in terms of the legitimacy of their project.
No, not really. No, there's nothing to argue about with them. I mean, there's a simple matter of survival. I want them to be extirpated.
Or then move it down to the people who are blocking stem cell research.
That is a purely primate response with me. They're recognizing the need to destroy an enemy in order to assure my own survival. I've no interest at all in what they think.
But it sounds like you're
really, we haven't still come to your question. about Islam, but no interest at all in what they think. Only interested in refining methods of destroying them.
Okay. In other words, you've simply given up
a task in which, by the way, one gets very little secular support.
Yes,
most atheists don't want this fight.
Yeah.
The most important one is the one they want to shirk. They'd far rather go off and dump on Billy Graham.
Well,
because on that they know that they can't. There's no danger.
I think that because we find the idea of exterminating these people just abhorrent, and we think that besides it will.
No, I said extirpating.
Extirpate.
Yes. Complete destruction of the jihadist forces. Extermination, I think, has to be applied more as a species. Or to
no, but Christopher, going back to your thing about, it sounds as though you like argument, you like having, it's almost the theatre of having an intellectual argument which would be lost.
Well, I would rather say the dialectic, actually, Richard. In other words, one learns from arguing with other people.
Yes.
And I think all of us around this table have probably enhanced or improved our own capacities as reasoners.
Yes, but I mean, there are plenty of other things to reason about. You can having won the battle against religion, we can go back to science or whatever it is we practice, and we can argue and reason about that. And there's plenty of arguments that are really worthwhile.
But it'll always be the case that some will attribute their presence here to the laws of biology, and others will attribute their presence here to a divine plan that has a scheme for them.
Well, that's
and you can tell a lot, in my view, about people from which view they take. And as we all know, only one of those views makes sense, but how do we know that? Because we have to contrast it with the opposite one.
But let me make an
which
analogy
is not
here,
going to spare.
Because you could have said the same thing about witchcraft at some point in recent history. You could say that every culture has had a belief in witches, a belief in the efficacy of magic spells. Witchcraft is ubiquitous, and we're never going to get rid of it, and we're fools to try, or we can try only as a matter of dialectic. But witchcraft is going to be with us. Well, and yet witchcraft has almost without exception. I mean, you can find certain communities
not
where
at all.
No, I mean, real witchcraft. Witchcraft
is completely ineradicable. It spreads like weed, often under animist and Christian.
No, I don't mean
not in the Western world.
I mean frank witchcraft. Witchcraft of the evil eye, and instead of medicine, you have.
You think you've got rid of that?
I think we've got. Fundamentally, we've got rid of that. Yes.
In any case, don't you want to get rid of it? I mean,
not at all. There's currently a campaign to get Wiccans registered to be buried in Arlington Cemetery.
Well,
but
Wiccans
are to witchcraft as Unitarians are.
Right. They're not real. I'm talking about a willingness to kill your neighbor because you think that there is some causal mechanism by which they, through their evil intent, could have destroyed your crops psychically. Or cast an evil eye upon your. I mean, it comes in ignorance of medical science. I mean, you don't know why people get sick, and you suspect your neighbor of ill intent, and then witchcraft fills the void there.
No, one wouldn't say in such a case that one wished to be. One didn't wish to be without it. That we lost something interesting to argue
we are
with.
effectively. I mean, we're not dealing with the claims of witches intruding upon medical. Don't go to alternative medicine and acupuncture here. I'm talking about real witchcraft.
Well, I was about to do that very thing. Yeah. And the Washington Post publishes horoscopes every day.
Astrology is yet another matter.
But astrology is a pale...
Astrology is not going to be eradicated.
But it doesn't need to be eradicated.
No, but you're confusing whether it's going to be eradicated and whether you want it to be eradicated. And it sounds as though you don't want it to be eradicated because you want something to argue against and something to sharpen your wits up.
I think that is, in fact, what I...
But in fact, instead of thinking about eradication, why not think about it the way an evolutionary epidemiologist would and say, what we want to do is we want to encourage the evolution of a virulence. We want to get rid of the harmful kinds. And I mean, I don't care about astrology. I don't think it's harmful enough. I mean, it was a little scary when Reagan was reportedly using astrology to make decisions. But that, I hope, anomalous case aside, I find the superstition that astrology is important to be relatively harmless. If we could only do the same thing, if we could only relegate the other enthusiasms to the status of astrology, I'd be happy.
Right.
Well, look, you don't accept or you don't like my answer, but I think the question is going to be asked of us. It was asked of me today, actually, again on the TV. Said, do you wish no one was going to church this morning in the United States?
Right.
What's your answer?
Well, I've given mine.
Richard's
disagreed a bit. But the answer I gave this morning was, I think people would be much better off without false consolation, and I don't want them trying to inflict their beliefs on me. They'd be doing themselves and me a favour if they gave it up. So perhaps in that sense I contradict myself. I mean, I wish they would stop it, but then I would be left with no one to argue with.
But you have many other subjects.
And I certainly didn't say that I thought if they'd only listened to me, they would stop going. Okay, so there are two questions here. So that was my very experimental answer. But I'd love to hear, would you like to say that you look forward to a world when no one had any faith in
Yeah, I want to answer this. Whether it's astrology or religion or anything else, I want to live in a world where people think skeptically for themselves, look at evidence, not because astrology is harmful. I guess it probably isn't harmful, but if you go through the world thinking that it's okay to just believe things because you believe them without evidence, then you're missing so much. And it's such a wonderful experience to live in the world and understand why you're living in the world and understand what makes it work, understand about the real stars, understand about astronomy, that it's an impoverishing thing to be reduced to the pettiness of astrology. And I think you can say the same of religion. The universe is a grand, beautiful, wonderful place. And it's petty and parochial and cheapening to believe in jinns and supernatural creators and supernatural interferers. I think you could make an aesthetic case that we want to get rid of.
Fine.
I could not possibly agree with you more.
But let's talk about priorities.
Okay.
If we could just get rid of some of the most pernicious and noxious excesses, what would be the triumphs you would go for first? What would really thrill you as an objective reached? Let's look at Islam, and let's look at Islam as realistically as we can. Is there any remote chance of a reformed, reasonable Islam?
Well, isn't the present savage Islam actually rather recent? Isn't it the Wahhabi?
You have to go back quite a ways, I think, to get
only up to a point. I mean, I think there's, and again, none of us are whether we're equipped to do it, we're not the most persuasive mouthpieces of this criticism. I mean, it takes someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or a Muslim scholar, someone like Ibn Waraq, to authentically criticize Islam and have it be heard by people, but especially the secular liberals of a sort who don't trust our take on this. But it seems to me you have different historical moments in the history of Islam that are distinct. One where Islam really has you have some Muslim, you have a caliphate, or you have some Muslim country which has a reign of Islam and is unmolested, but for whatever period of time from the outside, and then Islam can be as totalitarian and happy with itself as possible, and you don't see the inherent conflict and the inherent liability of its creed. I mean, Samuel Huntington said Islam has bloody borders. It's at the borders that we're noticing this problem, and the borders of Islam and modernity at this moment, the conflict between Islam and modernity. But you can find instances in the history of Islam where people weren't running around waging jihad because they had successfully waged jihad.
Yeah. But then what about women in that
exactly,
world?
the suffering of women within those borders.
Even in the best of times.
But there's also there's obviously some kind of syncretism. I mean, we know quite a lot now. There have been some wonderful books. Maria Monaco's book on Andalusia, for example, on periods where Islamic civilization was relatively at peace with its neighbors and doing a lot of work of its own on matters that were not jihadist. And I saw myself during the wars in post-Yugoslavia that the Bosnian Muslims behaved far better than the Christians, either Catholic or Orthodox, and were the victims of religious massacre and not the perpetrators of them, and were the ones who believed the most in multiculturalism. So it can happen. You could even meet people who said they were atheist Muslims or Muslim atheists,
wow.
or Muslim secularists in
Bosnia.
In Sarajevo. You could, yeah, which is a technical impossibility. But
right.
the problem is this: whether we think, as I certainly very firmly do believe, that totalitarianism is innate in all religion, because it has to want an absolute, unchallengeable, eternal authority.
In all religion.
Must be so. The creator whose will can't, our comments on his will are unimportant. His will is absolute. It cannot be challenged, and applies after we're dead as well as before we're born. I mean, that is the origin of totalitarianism. I think Islam states that in the most alarming way, in that it comes as the third of the monotheisms and says nothing further is required.
Right.
This is the last. There have been previous words from God, we admit that. We don't claim to be exclusive, but we do claim to be final. Yeah. There's no need for any further work on this point.
And we do claim that there's no distance between theology and
in our world, surely the worst thing anyone can say is no further inquiry is needed.
Right.
You've already got all you need to know. All else is commentary. That's the most sinister and dangerous thing. And that is a claim that Islam makes that others don't quite make in the same way.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment on that.
There's no
point.
refutation of Islam in Christianity or Judaism, but there is in Islam. Let's say we accept all the bad bits of Judaism. We love Abraham and his sacrifice of his son, willingness to sacrifice. Yeah. We love all that. We absolutely esteem the virgin birth, the most nonsensical bits of Christianity. We think, that's great. You're all welcome to join, but we have the final word.
Right.
That's deadly.
Yes.
And I think our existence is incompatible with that preaching.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a moment, so at least we're clear what the position is.
I'd rather speak for the devil pro bono myself.
Well, okay. We can all speak for the devil. I'm sure a lot of people think we're doing just that. I, for one, think that the fact that something is true is not quite sufficient for spreading it about or for trying to discover it. The idea that there's things we should just not try to find out is an idea that I take seriously. And I think we at least have to examine the proposition that there's such a thing as knowing more than is good for us. Now, if you accept that so far, then a possibility we have to take seriously, even when we reject it, we should reject it having taken it seriously, is the Muslim idea that indeed the West has simply gone way too far, that there is lots of, this is knowledge that's not good for us, it's knowledge that we were better off with that, and the fact that many Muslims would like to turn the clock back, they can't, of course. But I have a certain sympathy for a Muslim who says, well, yeah, the cat's out of the bag, it's too late, it's a tragedy. You in the West have exposed truths to yourselves, and now you're forcing them on us, that the species would be better off not knowing.
I'm absolutely riveted by what you say. I'd really love an instance, in theory or practice, of something you think we could know but could forbid ourselves to know. Because that is harder for me to imagine a world without faith.
Well, you brought up the bell curve. I mean, if there were reliable differences in intelligences between races or species,
but I don't think any of us here do think that that's the case. I mean, I think there must be something. You must have thought of something you could believe, but wish you didn't know.
Oh, I don't think it's hard to dream up things which, if they were true, it might be better for the human race to go on not knowing them.
But could you concretize it just a little more? I'm completely fascinated.
I mean, the hypothetical is one thing, but Christopher's asking, do you actually, have you ever suppressed something?
No, I haven't.
No.
Can you imagine yourself doing so, by the way? I mean, I can't.
Oh, I can imagine it. I hope it never comes up.
Well, take the synthesizing of bioweapons. I mean, should nature publish the code for smallpox, where you can just, anyone within his lab can.
There's all those.
All right, but that wouldn't be a knowledge of which we should remain innocent.
Well,
that would be an ability. That would be more like a capacity.
I think with foresight, it's certainly you can conceive of a circumstance where someone can seek knowledge, the only conceivable application of which would be unethical, or the dissemination of which would put power in the wrong hands. Or,
Yes.
I mean, but actually, you brought up something which I think is crucial here, because it's not so much the spread of the seditious truths to Islam or the rest of the world that I think we're guilty of in the eyes of our opponents. It's the not honoring of facts that are not easily quantified and easily discussed in science. I mean, the classic retort to all of us is, prove to me that you love your wife. I mean, as though this is a knockdown argument against atheism. You can't prove it. Well, if you unpack that a little bit, you can prove it. You can demonstrate it. We know what we mean by love. But there is this domain of the sacred that is not easily captured by science, and scientific discourse has really ceded it to religious discourse historically.
Well, and artistic discourse.
Yeah,
which is not religious necessarily.
But I would argue it's not even well captured by art necessarily. There's something in the same way that love is not really well captured by art, and compassion is not. Well, I mean, you can represent it in art, but it's not reducible to. You don't go into the museum and find compassion in its purest form. And I think there's something about the way we, as atheists, merely dismiss the bogus claims of religious people that convinces religious people that there's something we're missing. And I think we have to be sensitive to this.
Absolutely. That's why they bring up, what about when has secularism ever built anything like Durham Cathedral or Chartres or devotional painting or the music of
Bach?
But I think we have answers
yes.
to that. I think we have answers to that. I mean, and you
Yes, we do.
provide a very good answer to that. If there was secular patronage of the arts at that point, then one, we can't know that Michelangelo was actually a believer, because the consequences of professing your unbelief in that case was death. But two, if we had a secular organization
to commission Michelangelo,
we would have all that secular artwork.
Though, I didn't actually say that the corollary held.
Which?
I think it's true we can't know with devotional painting and sculpture and architecture that the patronage didn't have a lot to do with it. But I can't hear myself saying, if only you had a secular painter, you've done just as good work.
Oh, no. I think I'm fusing you and Richard there.
I think I can't, I don't know why, and I'm quite happy to find that I don't know why. I can't quite hear myself saying
that Michelangelo, if he'd been commissioned to do the ceiling of a museum of science, wouldn't have produced something just as wonderful.
In some way, I'm reluctant to affirm that, yes.
I find it very, very easy to believe that.
That could be a difference between us. I mean, with devotional poetry, where I do think, I don't know very much about painting or architecture or music, but, and some devotional architecture, like, say, St. Peter's,
it couldn't be done.
I don't like anyway. And knowing that it was built by a special sale of indulgences doesn't help either. With devotional poetry, like that of, say, John Donne or George Herbert, I find it very hard to imagine that it's faked or done for a patron. I mean,
yes, people would
be it would be very improbable people would write poetry
but
like
could
that
it be done in
to
the spirit
please
of
anyone.
reason?
Well, I frankly think that's the only explanation.
But in any case, what conclusion would you draw? I mean, if Donne's devotional poetry is wonderful, so what? I mean, it doesn't show that it represents truth in any sense.
Not in the least. Well, my favourite devotional poem is Philip Larkin's Churchgoing, one of the best poems ever written. It exactly expresses. I wish I had it here. Well, actually, I do have it here. If you like, I can read it. But I wouldn't trust anyone who believed any more or any less than Larkin does when he goes to a wayside Gothic church in the English countryside. Who felt, I don't say believed, I shouldn't say believed, who felt any more than he does. He's an atheist. Or who felt any less, that there's something serious about this.
All right, and
something written into the human personality and as well as the landscape.
This brings us back to your
I don't
question.
see that this is
anything
other than a special
saying
case.
It says nothing about the truth of religion.
I don't think this is how this is anything other than a special case. Other special cases of which would be, you just couldn't. I can't think of a perfect example of this. Only by being lost at sea for 2 years in a boat and then surviving that. That's the only way you could conceivably have written this account. It could not be fiction.
Or quit smoking.
And it's glorious, wonderful art, and that can be true, and we just accept that's true. And Donne's poetry, only very extreme circumstances could make it possible. And we can be grateful, perhaps, that those extreme circumstances existed and made this possible.
In his case.
Right.
But now you wouldn't recommend being lost at sea to everyone.
No.
No, I wouldn't recommend Death Be Not Proud to anyone either. That's a wonderful poem. It's a complete gibberish if you look only at the words.
But
it's the most extraordinary gibberish if you look only at the words, but there's an X factor involved, which I'm quite happy to both assume will persist and will need to be confronted.
Right. You raised this issue, though, of whether or not we would wish the churches emptied on Sundays. And I think you were uncertain whether you would, and I think I would agree. I would want a different church. I would want a different ritual motivated by different ideas. But I think there's a place for the sacred in our lives, but under some construal that doesn't presuppose any bullshit. But I think there's a usefulness to seeking profundity as a matter of our attention,
sure.
and our neglect of this area, I think, as atheists, at times makes even our craziest opponents seem wiser than we are. And I mean, take someone like Sayyid Qutb, who's as crazy as it gets. I mean, Osama bin Laden's favorite philosopher, but he came out to Greeley, Colorado, I think it was around 1950,
yes.
and spent a year in America and noticed that all his American hosts were spending all their time gossiping about movie stars and trimming their hedges and coveting each other's automobiles. And he came to believe that America was or the West was so trivial in its preoccupations and so materialistic that it had to be destroyed. Now, this shouldn't be construed as giving any credence to his worldview, but he has a point. There is something trivial and horrible about the day-to-day fascinations of most of us and most people most of the time. There's a difference between kind of really using your attention wisely in a meaningful way and our perpetual distraction. And traditionally, only religion has tried to enunciate and clarify that difference. And I think that's that's a lapse in our.
I think you've made that point, and we've accepted it, Sam.
Yeah.
And I think that's. I mean, as going back to the thing about whether we like to see churches empty, I think I would like to see churches empty. What I wouldn't like to see, however, is ignorance of the Bible, because you cannot understand literature without knowing the Bible. You can't understand art. You can't understand music. There are all sorts of things you can't understand for historical reasons. But those historical reasons you can't wipe out. They're there. And so even if you don't actually go to church and pray, you've got to understand what it meant to people to pray and why they did it and what these verses in the Bible mean and what this...
But is it only that? Just the retrospective kind of historical appreciation of our
You could more than just
ancestors'
appreciate
ignorance?
it. You can lose yourself in it just as you can lose yourself in a work of fiction without actually believing that the characters are real.
But you're sure you want to see the churches empty? You can't imagine a variety of churches, maybe by their lights, an extremely denatured church, a church which has ritual and loyalty and common cause and purpose, but and even
music.
Sing, and music, and they sing the songs and they do the rituals, but where the irrationality has simply been laundered out.
Okay, yeah. So you go to those places for funerals and weddings, and you have beautiful poetry and music.
And also for
group solidarity.
Group solidarity to create some project which is hard to get off the ground otherwise.
I think there's one more tiny thing. I mean, I haven't been tempted to go to churches as a very, very small boy, but I mean, one reason that makes it very easy to keep me out of it is the use of the New English Bible instead of the King James one.
Yes.
I mean, there's really no point. I can't say where anyone goes, and I can see how people stay away.
No.
They've thrown away
all the poetry,
pearl richer than all their tribe.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
They don't even know what they've got. It's terrible. If I was a lapsed Catholic and I brooded about how I wanted my funeral to be, which is not something I would.
You want the Latin Mass.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Well, but, I mean, there's another
sure.
issue there, which of course is that is when it becomes
I want a proper
intelligible,
tridentine.
when it becomes intelligible, the nonsense becomes more transparent, and so if it's in Latin, it can survive much better. It's rather like a camouflaged insect. It can get through the barriers because you can't see it. And whereas when it's translated into not just English but modern English, you can see it for what it is.
But now, seriously, then, do you therefore delight in the fact that churches are modernizing their texts and using the...
No, I don't. It's an aesthetic point. No, I don't.
No.
That's the worst of both worlds.
I think it seems to
Yes.
me.
Right.
And we should be grateful for it. We didn't do this to them.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't impose this on them.
Any more than we
weren't clever enough.
any more than we don't blow up Shia mosques either.
Yeah.
We don't blow up the Bamiyan Buddhas.
Bamiyan Buddhas, exactly.
We don't desecrate. We would be for the reasons given by Sophocles and Antigone. We would have a natural resistance to profanity and desecration. We leave it to the pious to destroy churches and burn synagogues or blow up each other's mosques. And I think that's a point that we might spend more time making, because I do think it is feared of us. This was my point to begin with, that we wish for a world that's somehow empty of this echo of music and poetry and the numinous and so forth. That we would be happy in a brave new world. And since I don't think it's true of any of us,
it's not.
It's a point one might spend a bit more time making. That the howling wilderness of nothingness is much more likely to result from holy war, or religious conflict or theocracy, than it is from a proper secularism, which would therefore, I think, have to not just allow or leave or tolerate or condescend to or patronize, but actually, in a sense, welcome the persistence of something like faith.
I
feel I've put it better now than I did at the beginning.
Unintelligently there. I think. What do you mean something like faith?
Yeah, and how like faith?
Something like the belief that there must be more than we can know.
Well,
that's
not
fine.
Dennett believes that. That's not faith.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we know there's more than we presently know.
Well, that was my original point in
saying
saying if we could find a way of enforcing the distinction between the numinous and the superstitious, we would be doing something culturally quite important.
Yes.
When I'm told about this, well, Richard and I did this at Central Hall with Scruton and that very weird team that we debated, who kept on saying, Scruton particularly, well, what about good old Gothic spires and so forth. I said, look, I wrote a book about the Parthenon. I'm intensely interested in it. I think everyone should go, everyone should study, and so forth. But everyone should abstain from the cult of Pallas Athena. Everyone should realize that probably what that sculptural frieze that's so beautiful describes may involve some human sacrifices. Athenian imperialism wasn't all that pretty even under Pericles. So the great cultural project, in other words, may very well be to rescue what we have of the art and aesthetic of religion while discarding the supernatural.
And I think acknowledging the evil that was part of its creation in the first place. That is, we can't condone the beliefs and practices of those Aztecs, but we can stand in awe of and want to preserve their architecture and many other features of their culture, but not their practices and not their beliefs.
I once did a British radio program called Desert Island Discs, where you have to go on and choose your 6 records which you take to a desert island and talk about it. And one of the ones I chose was Bach, Mache dich mein Herz rein.
Oh, yeah.
It's wonderful,
Beautiful
sacred music. And the woman questioning me couldn't understand why I would wish to have this piece of music. It is beautiful music, and its beauty is indeed enhanced by knowing what it means.
Yeah.
I mean, but you still don't actually have to believe it. It's like reading fiction.
Exactly.
You can lose yourself in fiction. and be totally moved to tears by it.
Yes.
But nobody would ever say you've got to believe that this person existed and that the sadness that you feel really reflected something that actually happened.
Yes, like the Bishop of Dublin who preached a sermon against Swift and said that he'd read every book of Gulliver's Travels, and for his part he didn't believe a word of them.
Yes.
So that's the locus classicus, I think, of all that. Well, clearly we're not cultural vandals, but maybe we should think of the way in which so many people suspect that that's what we are.
Yes.
If I would accept one criticism that these people make, or one suspicion that I suspect they harbour, or fear that they may have, I think that might be the one.
Yes.
Right.
That it would be all chromium and steel and
yes,
and
very
no
much
Christmas
so.
carols and no
Yes.
and no menorahs.
They couldn't possibly. Anybody who makes that criticism couldn't possibly have read any one of our books.
No. Well, that's another problem too.
which is another
isn't
problem.
It? Is the people that, of course, this isn't just our books. It's so many books. People don't read them; they just read the reviews and then they decide that's what.
we're about to have the Christmas wars again, of course, and this being the last day of September, you can feel it all coming on. But I always, whenever it comes up, when I go on any of these shows to discuss it, I say it was Oliver Cromwell who cut down the Christmas trees and forbade. It was the Puritan Protestants, the ancestors of the American fundamentalists, who said Christmas would be blasphemy. Do at least respect your own traditions, because I do.
Yes.
I think Cromwell was a great man in many other ways as well.
Right.
This is actually a pagan festival.
Well, we were all outed with our Christmas trees last year.
Yes, we had did
I
you
have
see
not the
that?
slightest problem with Christmas trees.
No, we had our Christmas card with our pictures of
It's
us.
a good old Norse booze up, and why the hell not?
Right.
Well, but it's not just that. I mean,
I like solstices as much as the next person.
we have an annual Christmas carol party where we sing the music and all the music with all the words and not the secular
And
Christmas
why
stuff.
not? Yes.
And it's just glorious stuff.
Yeah.
That part of the Christian story is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful tale, and you can love every inch of it.
I
without
once at lunch was next to the lady who was on our opponent at that debate in London,
Rabbi Neuberger.
Rabbi Neuberger, and she asked me whether I said grace in New College when I happened to be senior fellow, and I said, of course I say grace. It's a matter of simple courtesy, and she was furious.
Oh, really?
That I should somehow be so hypocritical as to say grace, and I could only say, well, look, it may mean something to you, but it means absolutely nothing to me. This is a Latin formula, which has some history, and I appreciate history. Freddie Eyre, the philosopher, also used to say grace, and what he said was, I won't utter falsehoods, but I have no objection to uttering meaningless statements.
Yes.
Right, that's very good.
Yeah.
The Wickham professor.
Yes.
The
with
Wickham
logic,
professor,
yes.
Professor was an old friend. Did we answer your question on Islam?
I don't know. I think it's... Well, I'll ask a related question. Do you feel there's any burden we have as critics of religion to be even-handed in our criticism of religion? Or is it fair to notice that there's a spectrum of religious ideas and commitments, and Islam is on one end of it, and the Amish and the Jains and others are on another, and there are real differences here that we have to take seriously?
Well, of course we have to take them seriously, but we don't have to do the network balancing trick all the time. There are plenty of people taking care of pointing out the good stuff and the benign stuff, and we can acknowledge that and then concentrate on the problems. That's what critics do. And again, it's, if we were writing books about the pharmaceutical industry, would we have to spend equal time on all the good they do? Or could we specialize in the problems? And I think it's very clear.
I think Sam's asking
But
more about...
we could criticize Merck if they were especially egregious as opposed to some other company. I mean, if we were focusing on the pharmaceutical industry, not all pharmaceutical businesses would be culpable in the same way.
Yeah, right. Well, and so then the question is what? Is there something wrong with
No, I think you're talking at cross purposes. I think
No.
Sam's asking about whether we should be even-handed in criticising the different religions.
Yeah,
You're talking
whether
about
all-
even-handedness about good versus bad. And,
Whether all religions are equally bad.
yes,
Seems to be the
whether
question.
Islam is worse than
Yeah.
Christianity or
It seems to me that we fail to enlist the friends we have on this subject when we balance this. I mean, it's a tactic. It's a media tactic, and in some sense, it's a almost an ontological commitment of atheism to say that all faith claims are in some sense equivalent. You know, the media says the Muslims have their extremists, and we have our extremists. We have jihadists in the Middle East, and we have
There's an imbalance there.
people who kill
Yeah.
abortion doctors,
Yeah.
and it's just not a real equation. I mean, the mayhem that's going on under the aegis of Islam just cannot be compared to the fact that we have two people who a decade kill abortionists, and so I think my commitment. I mean, this is one of the problems I have with the concept of atheism. Is I just think it hobbles us in this discourse where we have to seem to kind of spread the light of criticism equally in all directions at all moments, and I think we could, on any specific question, have a majority of religious people agree with us. I mean, a majority of people in this country, in the United States, clearly agree that the doctrine of martyrdom in Islam is appalling and not benign and liable to get a lot of people killed and worthy of criticism. Likewise, the doctrine that souls live in petri dishes. Even Christians, even 70% of Americans don't want to believe that in light of the promise of stem cell research. So it seems to me once we focus on particulars, we have a real strength of numbers, and yet when we stand back from the ramparts of atheism and say it's all bogus, we lose 90% of our neighbors.
Well, I'm sure that's right. On the other hand, my concern is actually not so much with the evils of religion as whether it's true. And I really do. I mean, I care passionately about that. The fact of the matter is there, as a matter of fact, a supernatural creator in this universe, and I really care about that. And so, although I also care about the evils of religion, I'm prepared to be even-handed because they all make this claim, which seems to me equally.
I would never give up the claim that all religions are equally false. And for that reason, because they're false by preferring faith to reason, latently at least equally dangerous.
But equally false, but surely not quite equally dangerous because of
latently I think so, because
latently maybe
because of the surrender of the mind.
Yeah.
The surrender of the mind, the eagerness to discard the only thing that we've got that makes us higher primates, the faculty of reason. That's always deadly. And always,
I'm not sure.
I think
it's potentially
the Amish can't hurt me, but they can sure hurt the people who live in their community. They have a little totalitarian,
but not quite in the
system.
same way.
The Dalai Lama claims to be a god king of hereditary monarchy and inherited godliness. It's the most repulsive possible idea, and he runs a crummy little dictatorship in Dharamsala. Right. And it would be worse, and praises the Indian nuclear test, it would be worse. It's only limited by his own limited scope.
But if you added
the same evil
jihad to that, you would be more concerned.
Well, look, every time I've ever debated with Islamists, they've all said, you've just offended 1 billion Muslims, as if they spoke for them. Right. As if there's a definite threat to this, a menace, a military tone to what they say. In other words, if they'd said, you've just offended me as a Muslim, it doesn't sound quite the same, does it? If they were the only one who believed in the Prophet Muhammad. No, it's 1 billion. And by the way, what's implied in that is watch out.
Right. Yeah.
I don't care. If it was only one person who believed that the Prophet Muhammad had been given dictation by the Archangel Gabriel, I'd still say what I was saying.
Right, but you wouldn't lay awake
And
at
it would
night.
be just as dangerous that they believed that, yes. It would, because it could spread. The belief could become more general.
It has, in the case of Islam, it has spread and is spreading, and so its danger is not only potential but actual.
I can see no contradiction.
Yes, but over space and time, I think this tremendously evens out. I mean, I didn't expect, I'm sure neither did you, in the 60s, that there would be such a threat from Jewish fundamentalism relatively small numbers, but in a very important place, a strategic place, and deciding to try and bring on the Messiah by stealing other people's land and trying to bring on the end.
Yeah.
It's numerically, it's extremely small.
Right.
But the consequences that it's had have been absolutely calamitous. And we didn't used to think, actually, of Judaism as a threat in that way at all, until the Zionist movement annexed the Messianic, or fused with it, because the Messianists didn't used to be Zionists, as you know. So you'd never know when it's going to be next. I agree. I'm not likely to have my throat cut at the supermarket by a Quaker.
Yes.
But the Quakers do a lot of the work by saying we preach non-resistance to evil.
Right.
That's as wicked a position as you could possibly hold.
Given the right context.
I mean, what could be more revolting than that? Yeah. Say, you see evil and violence and cruelty and you don't fight it.
Yeah, they're free riders.
Yeah.
Okay.
Read Franklin on what the Quakers were like at the crucial moment in Philadelphia when there had to be a battle over freedom, and see why people despised them. I would have then said the Quakerism was actually quite a serious danger to the United States. So it's a matter of space and time. But no, they're all equally rotten, false, dishonest, corrupt, humorless, and dangerous.
It's true. I mean, there's one point you make here that I think we should say a little more about, is that you almost can never quite anticipate the danger of unreason. I mean, when your mode of interacting with others and the universe is to affirm truths you're in no position to affirm, the liabilities of that are potentially infinite. I mean, you just don't know. So to take a case that I raised a moment ago, stem cell research, you don't know going in that the idea that the soul enters the zygote at the moment of conception is a terrible idea. I mean, it seems a totally benign idea until you invent something like stem cell research, where it stands in the way of incredibly promising, life-saving research. And so there's something about dogmatism which you can almost never foresee how many lives it's going to cost, because its conflict with reality just erupts.
Well, that's why I think of the moment where everything went wrong is the moment when the Jewish Hellenists were defeated by the Jewish Messiahs, the celebration now benignly known as Hanukkah. So as it can not clash with Christmas. That's where the human race took its worst turn. There's a few people, but they re-established the animal sacrifices, the circumcision, and the cult of Yahweh over Hellenism and philosophy, and Christianity is a plagiarism of that. Christianity would never have happened, and nor would Islam.
Right.
No doubt there would have been other crazed cults and so forth, but there might have been a chance to not destroy Hellenistic civilization. Well, it's not a matter of numbers. It's a matter of, if I may say so, memes and infections, which will spread very fast. Of course, I would have certainly said in the 1930s that the Catholic Church was the most deadly organization because of its alliance with fascism, which was explicit and open and sordid. Much the most dangerous church, but I would not now say that the Pope is the most dangerous of the religious authorities. It's no question that Islam is the most dangerous religion, and partly because it doesn't have a papacy that can tell it to stop something and make an edict saying
control.
By all means, yes. But I would still have to say that Judaism is the root of the problem.
Although it's only the root of the problem in light of the Muslim fixation on that land. If the Muslims didn't care about Palestine, we could have the settlers trying to usher in the Messiah all they want. There'd be no issue. It's only the conflict of claims on that real estate. This is just to say that
well, both sides are
both sides are at fault. But the only reason why 200,000 settlers could potentially precipitate a global conflict is because there are 1 billion people who really care whether those settlers tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Which it's their dream to do.
Yeah.
Because they have the belief that one part of the globe is holier than another.
Right.
Than which no belief could be more insane or irrational or indecent. And so just a few of them holding that view and having the power to make it real is enough to risk a civilizational conflict which civilization could lose. I mean, I think we'll be very lucky if we get through this conflict without a nuclear exchange.
Actually, I think that's a very good topic. What are our most grandiose hopes and fears here? I mean, what do you think reasonably could be accomplished in the lifetime of our children? What do you think the stakes actually are? And
how would you get there?
Yeah, I mean, is there something we can engineer apart from just mere criticism? I mean, are there like practical steps? I mean, what with $1 billion could we do to affect some significant change of ideas? Is there any practical?
I feel myself on the losing side politically and on the winning side intellectually. I mean,
that's just you don't see anything to do.
In the current zeitgeist, I don't think we would be accused of undue conceit if we said of ourselves, or didn't mind it being said of us, that we've been opening and carrying forward and largely winning an argument that's been neglected for too long. That certainly in the United States and Britain at this moment, that's true, it seems to me. But in global terms, I think we're absolutely in a tiny, dwindling minority that's going to be defeated by the forces of theocracy.
Which will probably
you're betting against us.
No, I think they're going to end up by destroying civilization. I've long thought so.
Well, of course, you may be right,
but not without a struggle.
because it can be a single catastrophe.
Because that's my big disagreement with Professor Dawkins, is that I think it's us plus the 82nd Airborne and the 101st who are the real fighters for secularism at the moment, the ones who are really fighting the main enemy.
So in what sense do you disagree on that?
And I think probably among secularists that must be considered the most eccentric position you could possibly hold. That's a tooth fairy belief among most people. That I believe it to be an absolute fact. It is only because of the willingness of the United States to combat and confront theocracy that we have a chance of beating it. Our arguments are absolutely of no relevance in that respect.
No,
you may have many more takers, although not on the territory of Iraq. I mean, it may be that we need the 82nd Airborne to fight a different war in a different place for the same purpose, for the stated purpose.
Voila, by all means, there are reservations to be expressed by me, which I happily give you. But in principle, I think it's a very important recognition.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
And possibly tape.
I think we've had a wonderful discussion.
Great.
And thank you
Got a lot to think about.
very much.
Yeah.